I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here tonight. Some of you will remember about 5 years ago when we originally brought the Safety Kid program to Crown Heights. The first night we came was the night before Hurricane Sandy. Do you remember that? And all I know is the night after Hurricane Sandy, I got so many calls from Crown Heights saying that, and we thought this room was packed solid, and we were asked to come back and do it again. And we came back the night after Hurricane Sandy and did it again, and the room was packed solid. And they actually asked us to stay and do it a third time. And the third time we did it, I remember that I opened up and I looked into the room and I said, Crown Heights rocks. This is amazing. And I sit here and I look at you all and I look at the team that brought you together, and I go around the country. It is very difficult to get a full group of women like this many on a weeknight for almost anything. Not that women don't want to, but they can't necessarily prioritize it because of all the obligations we have. But for me to come in and see, I know so much planning happened. I know how much investment there was from so many of you. But to see how you all come, you all engage, it just brings back that same feeling of Crown Heights rocks. And I don't even use that word, but this shows me that dedication. It's 5 years later, you just sat, and I think there was so much I gained from Rifki. Rifki sat down, I said, Rifki, I don't really feel like speaking. I want to take in what you just said. So much to just take in. And nothing like being on stage with best friends. But I do want to just say that this is just really inspiring for me. So we're going to talk now about conversations. And I'm really appreciative because I think a lot of what Rifki kind of really set up in understanding kids is also going to really help us as we talk about this next piece. And we're going to talk about safe communities really begin at home. We each want to be responsible to keep our own children safe. That's what we want. And so we're going to take a look at what do we each need to know and how can our conversations with our children help us. Because one thing that I've learned over time is that I can give a long talk to parents about all kinds of things in reference to safety. But at the end, what they so often say is, give me the language. What do I actually say? And that was part of the beauty of what Rifki did. She did a lot of giving us language. And I think that that's what we need to think about tonight. So one of the things I want to just look at is, when we talk about protecting our children, we have to look at where our kids need to be protected. Because I'm going to spend a few minutes giving you a little bit of background, and then I'm going to actually go through conversation after conversation after conversation, okay? But something you all need to really be aware of is the numbers of places that our children need to be protected. Our children need to be protected in shul. Our children need to be protected when boys go into yeshivas and into dorms. Our children need to be protected in school. Our children need to be protected, that's a girls' school and a girls' dormitory. Our children need to be protected in our own homes. And our children need to be protected in camp. In order to do that, there's really one really important tool that will go about making sure that our children can be safe in each of those environments. And that single most important tool towards protecting each and every child from sexual abuse is you. You are the single most important tool in keeping children safe from child sexual abuse. It's you, it's the way you approach it, it's your conversations, it's your advocacy, it's your listening skills, it's your hearing them. You are the most important factor in keeping your children safe. And what we're going to talk about tonight are some of the skills to do that, to take that role seriously. I saw this recently, and I really felt it was important, because in our culture, as we just heard, I'd say the number of us that would raise our hands and say that our parents talked to us about these issues is a very low number. Now, most of you are much younger than me, so maybe it's somewhat higher. But most of us didn't get a lot of information from our own parents about protecting us from inappropriate touch or inappropriate situations in the world. Most of us did not get that. And we therefore don't have a language for it. Our culture is such that we don't talk about these things. Our culture is such that we can have entire workshops and discuss that parents have to tell children names of body parts, and parents can't do it. Parents cannot even tell children the names of their own body parts, and can't even come up with other ways of saying it, which leads our children to believe that their parents are not safe people to talk to about anything in relationship to the body because their parents can't talk about it, right? What I think we need to all understand is that if you're afraid to talk about child sexual abuse before it happens, you may only get the opportunity to talk about it after it happens. That's a really bad time to talk about it. So I really do want you to take from this that we all have to find ways to talk to our children in a way that is safe. Fewer than 30% of parents have discussed sexual abuse prevention with their children, and yet this is the best tool for prevention. Another statistic that I recently read that I have found so startling and yet so important is that approximately 70% of children at one point or another have told a parent when someone has been inappropriate with them. But over 70% of children who have told parents and have not been heard never tell again. And they spend the rest of their lives carrying that trauma in secret because their parents couldn't hear it. So we're going to need to learn to talk, and we're going to need to learn to hear, because those are all there to help and protect our children. These are the conversations we're going to talk about. And I'm not going to be overly eloquent tonight. I'm just going to be really practical. Really practical. I'm just going to sit down and tell you what you need to say. So these are the kind of things we're going to talk about. First, we're going to talk a little bit about approach and basic conversation skills. We're going to go through a bit of a review of the safety rules. I'm not sure how many of you were in these multiple rooms and multiple thousands of people that were here 5 years ago, but I'm going to go through a review, make sure we're all on the same page. And then we're going to talk about conversations related to playing doctor, sleepovers, camp safety, a sensitive discussion about not touching others. We're going to have a discussion about that. Puberty, it'll be a very light discussion. That needs an entire workshop. It needs an entire workshop, which I think is really important. Preparing teens to babysit, going to the mikveh for boys. This is not related to girls going to the mikveh at this point. And when a community incident occurs, how do we talk to our children about that? So I am going to do my best to work as quickly as possible. When I said to Brachi before, here's what I have, tell me which ones to cut out. She said, Debbie, just speak fast. We do fine with speaking fast here in Crown Heights. So I'm going to step up my California pace, and I am going to try to speak very quickly. Okay, parent conversation skills. This is the base for everything you guys need to know, that in all the conversations that we're going to have. The first and most important thing is you are responsible to have these conversations, to open conversations. Your children are not going to come to you if you haven't opened the conversations with them. So it's your job, and we're going to talk about it from when they're little to these other phases in their lives. It is your job to open the conversation related to their body and changes in their body and safe touch and inappropriate touch and all of that. You are the one who has to bring it up. You can't wait for them to bring it up. The message you give them when you don't bring it up is that you're not comfortable talking about it. I will tell you, I don't think it's a really big secret, that even though most people don't teach their children the name of their private parts, they do learn it. They generally learn it from the 5-year-old next door. The problem is that very often, when someone's inappropriate with a child, they tell another child. They don't tell their parent. And they tell another child because the other child's obviously comfortable talking about it, but the parent isn't. So you have to think about, really, who do you want to be the one to teach your child about the names of their private parts? Do you want the 5-year-old next door? Or do you want to be the one? Think about those things. You are responsible to open these conversations. Conversations are age-appropriate and developmental. For anybody who thinks you're going to walk out of here and you're going to know the talk, the big talk, that's not what we're going to do. If you go home and you say to yourself, you know what I'm going to do tonight? I am going to tell my child, no one's going to sleep around here till we get all this covered, right? You are in the wrong place. If the next time an incident occurs of some type and you have a 5-minute discussion, that may be all there is to it. I'll give you a quick example. I have a daughter-in-law who, when she's in her 9th month, she gets very, very emotional. And so she said to me that I was going to be in town, and she said to me, look, Mommy, you got to do me a favor. My daughter needs a bra. And I can't take her because when I'm in my 9th month, I get so emotional, and I know I don't want to discuss it that way. You take her. You talk to her. So she says, you talk to her. So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, what am I going to do? Walk up and say to my granddaughter, hey, can we discuss bras? What am I going to do? How am I doing this? So I said to her, you know what? I'm going to take her to the store and I'm going to buy her an outfit. Let's just create a normal situation and a normal conversation. So we go into the store and we're in the dressing room and we're looking and she's trying things on. And I look at her and I go, hey, Esty, how old are you now? She says, 11. I said, you're really starting to mature. Part of the first step of maturing is when girls' breasts develop. That's what happens. They start to develop buds. And that's what's happening to you. You know what we do when that happens? We get a bra. And then our dresses look a little bit more tznius, and they look a little better on us. You know what I think we ought to do? I think when we leave here, we should go get one. What do you think? Look how light that was. She got educated, basically, on the first step of puberty. It was a very light conversation, and it happened naturally. We actually went from there. We went to the store. We bought one. It was no big deal, right? And that's what we need to create, is normative small points. We had one piece of education in 5 minutes or less. And that's really often much more effective than big talks. We have to create open and trusting relationships with our kids so that they trust us, so they want to hear us, so that they can trust what we say. And part of that is making sure that we don't tell them anything that's not true. I remember when I was pregnant with my third child, my first was a very curious kid and had to know everything. He was very bright and he had to know everything. And I called up my pediatrician. I said, I know he's going to ask. I know he's going to ask. How do you have babies? And I don't know he's going to ask. What do I say? He said, all I can tell you is this. Tell him the truth. Because I'll tell you why. Anything you tell him that's not true, he'll remember forever. But if you tell him the truth, he's not going to remember a thing. He was like 3 years old, and he was right. We were able in very small, pieces to tell him, but what we said was true. And the issue is, and it's interesting because that son through his life, he would hear things in school and he'd come home and he'd say, Mommy, some of the boys in school said, and then he would tell me what they said. And I would say, that's not quite accurate. Let me explain what's a little bit more accurate, or I want Tati to talk to you about that. And he would say at some points, okay, that's all I need to know. And you know what? He was telling us, I just needed to understand that piece. I don't need more. So these natural conversations and trusting that you're the parent that's going to tell them the truth is so important. Be that parent that the kids feel comfortable asking or talking to. The kid who can go home and say, I can ask my own mom. My mom's the one that I can ask. Be that parent. Okay. If something does happen, then be there quickly and know how to respond. Because you have to validate your child for telling you. You need to believe your child, and you need to act on it. So if you've already opened a relationship with them, you've developed a relationship with them, then they are going to be there. They're going to turn to you if something happens, and then you can stop it right there. And you can help them, and you can get them the help they need, and you can show them you believe them and believe in them. So this is built on relationship. You have to build your relationship. The conversations have to be developmental and appropriate and honest. And that's the role that you need to have in these relationships. Okay, let's just do a quick review of what the safety rules are. And we're going to do this really quickly. Okay, these are some of the things that over time that you have to explain to your children. Okay? Your private parts are those parts of the body that are covered by a bathing suit. It is important to try to come up with names, whether they're the real names, which are ideal, or whether they are names that you personally have in your family, that it's fine, but you need to make sure that you are clear about what private parts are. No one should ever touch, talk about, or look at the private areas of your body. You shouldn't, now watch what we're saying here because it's important. One is nobody should touch, look at, or talk about my private parts. The second is that touching, looking at, and talking about private parts of the body, well, let me just see this. Okay, the second is you shouldn't look at, talk about, or touch someone else. No one should touch you or look at you, and you shouldn't touch or look at anybody else. And the third actually is that nobody should ask you to look at them, right? So all of these, they can't touch or look at you, you can't touch or look at them, and you also can't ask anybody to touch or look at you. So you have to be very careful about all of that. Also, anything related to touching private parts is never a game. So if somebody says, this is just a private game between me and you, it's an automatic do tell. Anytime anybody relates the word game to touching of private parts, it's a no and an automatic do tell. Any relationship that people talk to your child about regarding private parts, if they say it's a secret, it's an automatic do tell. Touching the private areas of a body is never a secret. If someone says it's a secret, it's an automatic red flag to a child. It's a no, and it's a tell parents. And in fact, nobody should ever tell you a secret and tell you that that secret is one you can't tell your parents. Because when it comes to grooming behaviors and people want to create a special relationship with a child, they keep the relationship secret. They don't want to tell parents about that. So what you want to make sure is at all times your child knows that no one can tell you a secret not to tell mommy and tati. Okay? Nobody should tell you that. And if anybody ever breaks the safety rules or wants to touch you, look at you, or talk about the private areas of your body, if anybody ever breaks those safety rules, I want you to come and tell me, or tell another trusted adult if you can't find me, and I want you to tell right away. So you, the parent, are giving a message. If anybody touches, talks, or looks at your body, then it's an automatic do tell. I want you to give that message clearly. Anybody tries, talk. Because the power of sexual abuse is silence. The power of sexual abuse is people don't tell. Think for a minute about all the stories that have come out. Almost all of them happened 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Because that's how long the silence really is withholding within them. So what you want is to be giving your child a message. Someone violates you, you say no, you talk. I want you to come tell me. You want to give them the message, I care very much, and I always want to hear what you have to say, and I'll always believe you. You'll never be in trouble for telling me, and I'll always try to get you help. Now, if you don't give them this message, they will not know. So if you want them to know that if anybody's inappropriate with them, they can come tell you, you need to be the one to tell them. All right, let's talk about some of the other safety rules. They have a right and they should say no to anybody when it comes to touching. Even if it's an adult, even if it's a family member, like a sibling or a cousin or a grandparent, even if it's a rabbi or a rebbe, even if it's a camp counselor, even if it's a friend, even if it's an older child. If anybody wants to touch, look at, or talk about their body, or wants them to do it to the other persons, they can say no, and you want them to say no. Now remember what you want. You want them to say no and to tell you. You want them to say no and tell you. You want them to pair saying no and telling you. And you want them to say no to any touching game or secret or anything that makes them uncomfortable, and to immediately tell you. So that pairing is very, very important. Okay. Also, when teaching your kids about safety, you have to really use some concrete examples. For those of you who have been here when we discussed this before, one of the most startling statistics and most frightening statistics, especially in our world, is that in as much as 90% of situations where somebody's been sexually molested, it is by someone known, loved, and respected by the family. It is not strangers. And the highest percentage, about 68%, is within the family. We're not looking at strangers. So you need to be concrete. You need to be talking to your children so they know what you're talking about. So you might say something like, okay, these are the rules, and you just say some of the rules we talked about. And then you might say something like, well, what if you're at a friend's house and her older brother asks you to play a game that makes you feel weird or uncomfortable or involves something like touch or even taking off clothes? What would you do? So I just took my rule and made it concrete, right? You have to be concrete with them. You have to bring the examples because it also shows them you can talk about it. You know how to talk about it. You know how to be real about it. Sometimes relatives like grandparents or uncles or cousins, they don't understand the rules and they might touch kids in ways they're not supposed to. What would you do if chas v'shalom that happened to you? Or even a brother. What if a brother touched you in a way that made you uncomfortable? What would you do? You'd have to come tell mommy and tati right away. They're never allowed to do that. Something like, even in our house, if a sibling or cousin wanted to talk about or look at or touch the private areas of your body, you need to say no, and you need to tell me right away. I'm going to tell you something. I'm stressing this for a reason. I would say that the highest area of concern among Orthodox mental health professionals is relationships between siblings. The highest level of concern is relationships between siblings. I spoke to two large groups today, and something I didn't mention is that I had 3 disclosures of different types of things, and all of them involved siblings. We have to be very careful, but we need to set it up that siblings are not allowed to touch each other inappropriately. And so you need to be the ones that are able to say that you're not allowed even with siblings, and that you need to tell mommy or tati even if it's a sibling. You need to say no, and you need to tell, and we're going to help. And that if that happens, then you need to come to us and you need to talk. And what we're going to talk with you about is how do you respond to that as well? And how do you respond in a calm manner to that as well? I'm just going to tell you a quick story. I have a friend, a colleague, someone you know well as well, who went to a couple of these lectures of mine and where we talked about how to respond and how to be cool and all of that. And one night, he lives on the East Coast, and one night he calls me up and he's like, Debbie, I'm in my car. I said, okay. He says, I'm in my car, I'm not calm. I said, well, maybe you shouldn't be driving if you're not calm. No, you have to hear it. And I'm sitting there thinking, why are you calling me if you're in your car and you're not calm? He goes, you said that you have to stay calm. Well, I'm not calm. Then I'm getting the feel of what this is talking about, because no one ever calls me and says anything nice, you know. I always get not nice things happen. Anyway, so I said, okay, what happened? He says, well, I'm having one of these natural conversations you say we should have, and in the midst of it, my son says, I play that game with my brother and sister. I said, really, what'd you say? He said, I think we should discuss this later, and I got in the car. I was not calm. I said, I don't think that was a bad idea, because that was better than him screaming and yelling. So I said, do you know what game they play? He goes, no, I just left. I don't know what they play. I don't know what they do. He goes, I was just so upset that I got in the car and I left. So we talked a lot. And finally I said to him, until you can go home and have a calm conversation, you can't discuss it. You need to have a calm conversation. And one of the things that I expressed to him is what I call my peanut butter and jelly voice, which I think is really important. And that is that, like when you say to a child, would you like cream cheese or would you like peanut butter and jelly? Which would you like for a sandwich? Right? So do you care which they want? No. So what's my voice indicating? Whatever, right? Very calm. When you talk about things related to sexual abuse or anything sexual with children, you need to be showing them, I'm calm, cool, and collected. Peanut butter and jelly. I said to him, even if you need to practice with your wife or practice in front of a mirror, don't start talking about this, because let me tell you one thing kids pick up in a minute is when our voices start rising. And when we get tense, they can pick it up in a minute. So until you can speak calmly, I don't want you to have the discussion with them. But one thing you might think about before you get hysterical is, you might want to figure out what actually happened. To which he says, okay, but then what do? I said, well, why don't you talk to them about a plan? Why don't you see what happened and let them brainstorm with you about a plan of how that could not happen. Let's talk about it. Let's think about it. So it turns out he went home. He said to his wife, this is what Debbie says. They sat everybody down at the kitchen table. And he called me after, he said, I have to tell you the funniest thing. He says, my wife took a jar of peanut butter and put it on the table. He said, every time my voice started to rise, she slid it across the table. Every time hers did, I slid it back. And the conversation went with this peanut butter jar sliding back and forth. But in any case, they found out that there was a game, and it did involve touching. It wasn't a very serious game. But how come it wasn't serious? Because he had an open conversation at the very beginning, at an early phase. And he was able to stop it because they actually felt comfortable telling him, because he opened the conversation coincidentally, and they were able to tell him. And he said to them, it's not okay, it's against the safety rules, so let's all talk about how we're not going to do that. What can we do? And he said it was amazing. They all had all these ideas, when she goes to the bathroom, then we're going to close the door and we're going to put a sign outside with her name on it so we'll all know she's in the bathroom. And when, they had all these ideas on how not to. And then he said, and I thought it was a great idea. At the end, he said, okay, what happens if somebody slips and plays the game? What are you going to do? Oh, okay, we'll come tell you. And what happens if you feel like you want to play the game? What can you do? Well, if someone says they want to play the game, we have to say no. So he had a great conversation, and they brainstormed as a family. And that's what we want to look at, is how to have conversations so that you can work together in a calm way and nothing hysterical happens. Let's take a look at, as we're talking about that, let's take a look at what typically happens at the very beginning of these discussions with kids. And that has to do with playing doctor, right? So one of the things I say is just start talking about private parts and things when children are in a bath, when they're very young. And you can just say things like, did you clean your private parts? That's right. Well, we do that here in the bath, but that's private. Okay? So you can do that here in the bath, but that's private, and that's not a game, and you just can just bring things up very calmly while they're in the bath when they're young, right? And then when they get a little bit older and they start playing doctor, we do have to remember that playing doctor is natural. Playing doctor is normal. We played doctor when we were little. I'm sure my parents played doctor when they were little. And there is natural curiosity of children. That's not something to be punished. That's not something, if it's just an equivalent situation where they're, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. And there's no coercion, and there's no secret about it, and there's nothing. The other things that would make it things to be more concerned about would be if there was any type of penetration or any type of objects or any type of mouth used on a private part. That's what would make it concerning. In the majority of situations, that's not the case. And so if you walk in and your children are playing doctor, I'm going to tell you what you need to do, and it's really quick. You need to remind them of safety rule and redirect. So it would be, ooh, those are private parts. We don't play games with private parts. Come on, I've got Legos over here. We're going to take out the Legos, and I'm going to give you cookies and milk, and I want you to come in the kitchen, and we'll play in there. That's it. Repeat the rule, redirect. Keep them in your public area and redirect. That's the kind of thing you want to do. You might want to ask more questions if you're more curious about it, like who else have they played that game with, or how do they play that game, if you're more curious about what's going on. But in general, what you're going to do is remind them of the rule, state the rule, and redirect. It really helps with most situations. But even a game like playing doctor, you can say things like, when you play doctor, it's okay because you're allowed to look in ears, you're allowed to look in the throat, you're allowed to look at the elbows, you're allowed to look at the toes. That's how we can play doctor. But we never play with private parts because private parts are never a game. So you want to take that in a very age-appropriate way, and you want to talk about it in that way. But you have to open that discussion with them in a way that's not threatening or not frightening to them, but where you're clear with them. State the rule and redirect. Okay, let's talk for a little bit. Okay, we're going to talk for a little bit about sleepovers. I often get asked about sleepovers and how to talk to your children about sleepovers. The first thing I want to tell you about sleepovers is you are the parents. You're the parents. If you are not comfortable with the home they're going to, you are the parent. You can invite those children to your house, but you have the right to say no. And so often what parents say is, yeah, but then my kid tells me that everybody else's parents said. I really want to give everybody, I really want everybody to stand up and say, I commit that you won't be everybody else's parent. That you just say yes because your child said everybody else's parent. If you don't think something is good or healthy, say no. Or call the other parents and say, how are you feeling about this sleepover? If everybody stands together and says this doesn't sound good, then there won't be one. If you're not comfortable with your child in somebody's house for whatever reason, you need to say no. So you need to be the parent. And you need to make sure you're comfortable with your child going to that house before they go. And I am an advocate of calling and making sure that there will be supervision, that there will be an adult present. So with these, especially older girls, make sure that there's going to be an adult present. You're the parent, you're responsible. In terms of conversations with the kids, you might say something like, oh, you're going to a sleepover tonight. You know, we haven't talked about the safety rules lately, have we? I think it's a good time for us to go over it. Now, see what I just did? I took a window of opportunity. She's going to a sleepover, right? Let's just go over some of those. We haven't talked about it in a while. So one thing I would say is, before you go, remember all those rules we talked about, safe touch? They all apply at sleepovers. I think we have to remember that. And remember that touching is never a game and touching is never a secret. And, I can remember from when I was a kid that sometimes at sleepovers, people think that there can be touching games. And sometimes girls play touching games at sleepovers. So I really want to remind you of those safety rules. Touching is not a game, as touching is not a secret, even at a sleepover. And you're in charge of your body, so you can say no to any of those activities. Even if it's friends your own age, you have the right to say no. If your child is sensitive about sleeping times, about changing times, go over that with them. Doors shouldn't be locked. They shouldn't be locked into doors, and so that's something you might say to them. Make sure that doors aren't locked so that you're not locked into different areas. The other thing you can say is, I know that Connie has a bunch of brothers, and are you comfortable sleeping over there in that she has a bunch of brothers? Does that feel okay to you? And if she says, yeah, we never see them, and there's no relationship and whatever, then that's fine. If they say, you know what, sometimes her brothers really bother us, then you might say, do you feel that it's best for you to sleep over there? Or if at any point you're uncomfortable with any of those brothers, I want you to call me and I'll just come and get you. But bring it up if there's a lot of boys around. Bring up the issue of the boys in the house. It's important to talk about pranks and bullying behavior, because if there's groups of girls, they sometimes do pranks on each other. A healthy prank is a prank where everybody's laughing, and it doesn't affect anybody negatively, and no one walks out ashamed. An unhealthy prank is when everybody's laughing but one, and she walks out ashamed. You have to be the one to educate your child about this so that your child knows this information and your child knows that they're not allowed to play unhealthy pranks on others. And then you need to say, if you're uncomfortable with any games or any discussions or any pictures or movies, or if they have different rules than our family rules, then call home and just use our family code. And I am a big believer in a family code, which would mean that One of my favorites is, I have one of those headaches, because if a girl called home and said, I have one of those headaches, it would make sense that a parent would come pick them up, and they don't embarrass themselves by saying, Mom, can you come get me, because everybody's playing one of the games we're not allowed to play, right? So that's what I'm saying, is come up with a code so that they can come, so that they can call you, right? Camp. Let's talk about camp. What? I don't, oh, is this an alarm? Oh. Oh, okay. Okay. So there's two pieces to making sure that your child is safe during the summer. One is your work. You got to do it yourself. I'm going to say something. I've spent a lot of time talking to camps, and I'm going to say that the majority of camps don't get their counselors trained, and there's very little training that happens among the camp administration. And I'm going to say something that's going to be really not nice and you're not going to like. It's your fault. It's your fault as parents, because nobody ever calls them and says, how much training have you done in camp on sexual abuse prevention? What are the rules that you have to keep kids safe? And in that no parents put pressure on them, they don't do it. So if you want camps to put rules into effect that will protect children up in camp, you have to start pressuring camps. You have to start letting them know that it matters. I want to say that many years ago when I started this work, my sons were saying to me things like, Mom, this never happens. I don't know what you're talking about. And then at one point I said something about camp, and one of my son goes, well, everybody that happens to a camp, everybody. And the amount of stories that we hear that come from camps is unbelievable. So what I'm going to say is, call the camp. Find out, do they have a policy for counselors and for camp staff? Find out if kids are left alone unsupervised. Find out if campers are allowed to communicate with their families when they're in camp. And what procedures do they have? And what if there was an allegation? How would parents be notified? You have to do your research, and before you send your child to a camp, call. And when more and more of you start calling, camps will be pressured to take action and to make sure that more and more precautions are put in place. So number one is, you have to start communicating with the camps and showing them that that's a priority to you. Second is your discussion. Again, camp is a wonderful window of opportunity. Your child's about to go to camp, it's a time for you to talk. So again, let's go back to my Esty and getting her bra, where we just did it in a dressing room in a very calm way. So before they go to camp, they all need bathing suits, right? And that's a great way to do it, is you go into a dressing room, you're getting their new bathing suits, and you go, hey, we're getting new bathing suits, and you know what's hitting me? We haven't gone through the safety rules lately, have we? It's a really good idea for us to do that before we go to camp. It's a really good idea for us just to kind of remember what they are. I'm just you're putting on that bathing suit, and I'm remembering that any part of your body covered by the bathing suit is considered private. That's your private places, and that no one else should touch or look at or talk about it. So I'm sure before you go to camp, it's just really important that we remember that we kind of go over that. And one thing I can tell you that I can remember from being in camp is, camps have camp pranks, and sometimes they're really not nice. In fact, I can remember in one camp that I went to, it wasn't actually a camp I went to, but it's someone else I know who went to this camp, and what she said was that all the girls thought it would be really funny that when one girl they didn't like, when she went and she took a shower, that all the girls would take her towel and take all her clothes. And then she came out of the shower and everybody was like, ha, 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 isn't that hysterical? It's hysterical. Well, who was it hysterical for? It was hysterical for all the other girls, but it was shameful for this girl. It was absolutely shameful for this girl. So really talk with them about pranks. Let them know that a prank we said this before, but I'm going to say it again because it's important. A prank that ends up with one person hurt or shamed is an unhealthy prank. And it's against the Torah. That's right. And it's against the Torah. You're mavish them, right? But a prank where it's an innocent prank that everybody laughs together and nobody is shamed and it's just cute. Like I can remember at one point we did something on a Shabbaton where we took everybody's shoes and we lined them up going from the back all the way into the men's bathroom. Nobody got hurt. Kind of stupid, but nobody got hurt. And it's just everybody's shoes were lined into the men's bathroom. Everybody laughed, but nobody got hurt or ashamed. Okay? So you have to explain to them the difference. Remind your kids that no means no. They're in charge of their body and they have the right to say no to anybody in any camp situations. Talk to your kids about your own stories, your own experiences in camp. Remind your child every child sleeps in their own bed. Nobody else should be sleeping in their bed, and they're not allowed to sleep in anybody else's bed. And that anybody who makes them feel uncomfortable in camp in any way, whether they're male or female, that they need to speak to the trusted adult in camp. But I'm going to tell you something. When you're calling that camp and figuring things out, you got to figure out who that trusted adult is and tell them. You can't leave it to them because they may not be able to figure it out. So you need to do that. You have to identify who they can talk to, even if they're uncomfortable. And if they're uncomfortable and they're not sure what to do, they need to talk to the trusted adult in camp, or if the camp allows it, they need to call you. But your child shouldn't be feeling uncomfortable in camp. Okay. All right. I want to talk about this because this is a really important discussion. Like I said, 68% of sexual abuse occurs at home. And within the frum world, and Rifki will really attest to this, at every Orthodox conference that we have of Orthodox mental health professionals, the issues related to brothers and sisters is considered one of the major areas of concern. I personally have gone to so many of the Roshei Yeshiva to talk about sexual abuse and what we say in our Safety Kid program, and so many of them have said the same thing to me. You got to talk more about brothers and sisters. We got to help this situation. And I know it's painful to hear this as parents, but what I want you to know is that, and here I'm talking to moms, and in general, it is my belief that this is a father-son discussion, and so I'm going to encourage you to hear it and pay attention to it. You can take pictures of it if you want. I really wrote it out for that purpose, but I'd like you to share it with your husbands because it's ideal when your husbands can be the ones to have it with your sons, which is what's most important. But what they want to say something like, is something similar to this. I'm glad we've been able to have the discussion about rules related to your personal safety. And it's my way as a parent to help you feel safe. We've been able to go over all those rules. But there's also another aspect of personal safety that we have to talk about too. Just like no one's allowed to touch, talk about, or look at your private parts, you're not allowed to do that to anybody else's private parts. And I know that sometimes boys or girls might be curious or might feel a need to touch a sister or a brother or a cousin or a friend, but you're never allowed to touch their private parts, or never allowed to ask them to touch yours. So although this is sensitive to talk about, it's uncomfortable for me to talk to you about this, but it's so important for me to share with you that it doesn't happen that you initiate yourself or you show your private parts to someone or even look at somebody else when they're getting undressed. Sometimes kids feel like it feels like a game. Or sometimes kids convince others to play a game involving touching, or sometimes kids can be forceful and tell someone they have to let you touch them. And it can happen with brothers and sisters. And it can happen in school, it can happen in camp, it can happen at a sleepover, it can happen anywhere, or even in a dorm. It can happen anywhere. Besides the fact that it's not SNEAS and it's against the rules of safety, it's also against the law. Touching children and touching someone else is against the law. So, here's what I want you to know. If you ever feel that taiva, if you ever feel that you want to touch somebody else, I want you to come to me and I want you to tell me. Or if you've ever done that, touch someone, I want you to come to me and I want you to tell me. Because I'm your parent and I care. And no matter what, I'm going to love you and I'm going to help you and I'm going to take care of you. So I want you to come and I want you to tell me. Now I'm going to tell you that I've had this discussion so many times with parents, and the number of parents that have called me and told me that their children actually told them what they had done to sisters and how the parents were able to consult and to get them the appropriate help. It is so valuable to have that discussion. I'm going to go really quickly. Brachi's giving me that we have to stop soon, and I want to respect that. But I want to talk just a little bit, just for a minute, about puberty. We don't have time to have a whole discussion here about it. But what I want to say is that it's really important to find a natural window of opportunity to have that discussion. And I do want to say something. Girls are maturing. These are your daughters, they're maturing younger than ever before. By 8, 9, 10 years old, you're watching them starting to mature. If you're not telling them about this, they're hearing about it from others, and they hear about it in other ways. So if you want your child to learn about it in a healthy way, you're the best one to teach them. So you need to be the one to open that discussion. One of the things you might want to even ask them is, do you know anything about it? With girls, it's rather easy, because with girls you can talk about how their breasts start to grow, they start to bud, as it's the first step of puberty, and they're going to get their period, and you can explain what that is. That's very physiological, how you can explain those pieces of puberty to them. And that actually, as you go through and explain gently what a period is and what a cycle is and how they take care of themselves, and that it's the beginning phase of having children, because it's that cycle, and you can explain some of that. Those are important ways for you to begin to open those discussions. You want your daughters to hear from you, and then they can come back to you when they have other questions. With girls, we say, don't use cutesy terms, use real terms so they know that you're real with them and you're not uncomfortable. With boys, I've so often heard boys say things like, all my father used was these Gemara terms, and I didn't even know what he was talking about. Right? So they need to be real and talk about real things and the real changes that happen. Remind them that everybody goes through it, and tell them your own story. Tell them when you got your period, when you started to develop. But share with them so this becomes a bonding time, and they know it's my mom that came to me, because that makes them know you care, and it makes them know that they can come to you. So I'm going to just go to this last one, because my time is up here. And one thing I'm just going to say, because this happens in lots of communities, is that incidents occur and all the kids find out that someone in the community was accused, or there was an allegation of somebody being inappropriate, right? Now I'm going to say that one thing we need to be really responsible for is that somehow or another, in my day, let's just say I'm a lot older than most of you, in my day, anything in the world that happened was discussed by my parents behind closed doors. We heard nothing. Nothing. We knew nothing, right? The parents talked behind closed doors. Today, everything's at the table, everything's in the open, the kids tell, everything's just wide open. So one thing you have to be responsible for is that you have to control discussions that happen in your house about people. You might ask kids, what did you hear? Say things like, we don't know for sure what happened, but even if we think someone may have broken those rules and touch a child inappropriately, the first thing we have to do is make sure kids are safe. Do these allegations surprise you? You can ask a child that. Has he ever touched you? You'll probably hear lots of kids talking about the situation. A lot may not be true. A lot may be rumors and just rumors. And if you hear of anything of concern, or if you have questions, come ask me, and I'm happy to talk to you about it, because there's really a lot we don't know. But remember that you can help them understand this. Let them turn to you in a healthy way, and don't jump to conclusions with them and make it bigger than it is, but be real with them. Okay, I'm going to actually end because of time, but I just want to end with this thought that take these windows of opportunity. It's not one discussion. It's that your child knows that when it comes up, you're there. And you very calmly can discuss whatever it may be. You're that mom. You're the mom that they're okay talking to about it. And that if anything ever happened, you're the mom they can go to. And that's what I think really will keep all of our children safe. So best of luck. Okay.